Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Threat Talk. I'm your host, Bob Hansmann, and today's Threat Talk episode is about avoiding dumb mistakes with smart cities, obviously focusing on the common security missteps that we see happening. Now, cities have been computerizing and automating many of their services for years, and many of them were building out online portals and mobile apps for their citizen services even before the pandemic accelerated those plans. And as a result, just as with businesses and other government agencies, cybercrime is taking advantage of these vulnerabilities and security gaps. So today we've invited Krupa Srivatsan, Senior Director for Security Products at Infoblox, to help us dig into this topic. Now, she's been writing on this topic and presenting globally for some time. So Krupa, thank you for coming on to share your experience.
Thanks, Bob, for having me. This is a really exciting topic. I'm happy to discuss more.
Well, and what I'd like to start with is let's start talking about what makes a smart city more than, what makes it a smart city? It's more than just automated traffic lights, right?
That is right. So, what is a smart city, right? So, we can start by kind of looking at smart city in a holistic way, right? And if you look at how Gartner defines smart city, they call it a city that's designed to achieve holistic objectives. So, what does that mean? So it means, they're focusing on the entire like urban ecosystem and the development of the urban ecosystem, integrating their digital technologies that they're using to service their citizens, right? The local community. How are they collaborating with the residents? And also, of course, it includes all the things that we're used to hearing, which is your smart, traffic lights, smart parking meters. So all the IoT related kind of digital devices that are now connected to the network and capturing data, sending data as part of this whole ecosystem. So it's not just those smart meters; it's also the way that the city offers services to the community, to the local community. And as you mentioned, Bob, as the pandemic keeps moving on, there's a lot of people are looking for digital services. They don't want to line up in a city office somewhere, building somewhere to get basic services achieved, right? So these cities are having to meet their constituents in the digital space, which is how they prefer. And so that also constitutes a smart city. And granted, different cities are on different parts of their journey, like they're in different stages right now. Some cities are obviously more digitized and leverage all of these smart meters and smart devices more so than other cities, but most cities are on that path, right? Especially the larger cities. And it's global. It's not just US, right? It's globally. A lot of cities have projects and initiatives around digitization.
Yeah, I like the holistic reference that you made because one of the things I want to make sure everybody's aware of is, we can talk about how certain devices can become smart, like traffic lights. First, they were timed, and then it's late at night and you're on your way home from having stayed late at work and you're sitting at a light and it's red and nobody's coming the other way because it's late and the traffic's not normal, but the timing was set up based on the average daytime amount of traffic and the way things flow. And a smart city, now we've got more intelligent systems that can adapt to that with sensors and things like that. But even that doesn't make it a smart city. It makes it a smart device. The smart city is when all of this stuff's connected so that if all of a sudden there's road construction, that the system can adapt to the fact that there's all of a sudden going to be more traffic. Now that could be planned, but what about an accident? What about when you have multiple systems coming together, like on a lot of larger coastal cities, you've got people that they're using traffic lights to get to the ferry. They drive their car onto the ferry. Then the ferry has to cross, but those are timed and scheduled. Then maybe they park their car and maybe they have to take a train. There's so many different systems that they work together. And that's what I want to make sure everybody understands, that, that's the challenge. But one thing you didn't mention that I thought for sure you'd talk about, because you talk about this a lot, is IoT, the types of things they're putting. Smart cities are one of the biggest consumers of true IoT. Isn't that true?
That is correct, right? It's a lot. There is a lot of IoT devices in use in these smart cities. Now, there's some data and statistics that show that there is going to be more than 9.7 billion IoT endpoints that will be generating data. in smart cities by 2029. So this could be data that's as a result of embedded sensors, like you talked about, automatically adjusting traffic lights, waste management, waste collection, and other services for more efficient operations. And as we see more extreme weather events and disruptions globally, I think these sensors become even more important, right? If there are any local activities like fires that you see in California, things like that, how can you get that information out to the community, to the first responders? All of those things can be enabled by these smart IoT endpoints and devices. And so we're just going to see an explosion of these type of devices. So a couple of examples, if you look at Dallas, right, in Texas, obviously we all know Texas is an arid region with not a lot of rainfall. And one of the Dallas's primary concerns is water management, right? So what they're doing is they're adopting a smart water monitoring system where they can track usage throughout the city. And these will be able to detect leaks. Like these systems and sensors will be able to detect any water leaks to minimize wastage and things like that. And all of that information, will be processed by the city's water department for them, so that they can fix any issues quickly. So that's just one example of how these sensors are working to make these cities more efficient, right? And there are many, many, many other examples, right? For example, self-driving cars. We keep hearing about self-driving cars, and in San Francisco, they're looking at a vehicle grid for self-driving cars, right? And so you'll know exactly kind of the traffic patterns, where congestion is likely to happen, things like that. So a lot of great, exciting examples.
Yeah, and I've seen them on the emergency side as well, where you mentioned the arid environments. I know there's a couple of municipalities that I've talked to more on like a county or state level, where they've got sensors that they put up in the mountains that let them know that all of a sudden a dry riverbed is getting flooded and they need to prepare for it in the city. And so they have to automatically have certain sewer systems adapt to be prepared to receive that much water so they don't end up backing up into other systems and things like that. So disaster response, adapting to just human changes in behavior, it's the adaptability. But this is kind of where I think we're going to get into the meat of the security issue. The question I had lined up to ask you is, what are some of the unique challenges to a smart city? Now, that's kind of a loaded question. What are the unique challenges for a smart city security team? What are they dealing with? Is it really unique?
So in certain ways, it is unique simply because the amount of non-standard, diverse endpoints in these smart cities is significant, right? It's different from your standard kind of enterprise or an organization that is, maybe a financial organization or a retail or something, right? Here in this situation, there are a lot of diverse endpoints, like we talked about, IoT devices, and almost like smart city is almost exclusively dealing with remote devices, right? And they are kind of on the leading edge of IoT. So the biggest challenge in that scenario is visibility. Just knowing what devices are on the network and gathering data is a huge challenge, right? Especially when you don't have standard devices. So visibility is a top concern. And related to that is management of all these devices, right? How can you make sure that the data or the devices that are connecting are managed efficiently, are up to date in terms of if they need to be patched, for example. And many of these devices are non-standard, so you may not be able to deploy too much of security software on those devices as well. So you have that issue. And then finally, just the data collection, right? These sensors are there for a reason. They are there to gather real-time data and send it to a centralized server or something where that data is analyzed and processed. How do you keep the integrity of that data, and how do you secure that data when the line between the physical and the digital worlds are blurring? So I think that's another huge challenge for smart cities. And a lot of these systems could be mission critical, right? Like for your traffic lights, if they malfunction, you're going to have accidents, right? So reliability, right, on all of those things are super critical. I mean, these are similar challenges you see in other environments, but in smart cities, it becomes very acute, and it becomes mission critical.
Yeah, it's almost more a matter of scale. So it's technically the issues like patching and stuff like that are the same, but the scale and the fact that so much remote, I think the remote aspect is the one that kind of shocked me the most when I got into it, because I thought, well, you're just VPN and you own that traffic system, right? Yeah, but every traffic light is an IoT device. Every parking meter, every water meter on every building and home, there's just everything is remote. So two things that stood out to me. Number one, in a corporate or even a lot of government agencies that I've worked with, they have a lot of stuff on their network and they have a lot of remote stuff, but it's not, most of it's connected to the network. Here, almost everything is not connected to the network. Almost everything is remote. And so it's that scale alone gets to be a significant challenge. And then you highlighted, of course, the fact that you can't put security on a lot of these devices. They're proprietary, locked in devices. Part of their security benefits, security features, that you can't modify them, like my iPhone. I can't do anything to it because it's supposedly safe. So you kind of have to trust the vendor. But that kind of leads to the whole downside, the impact thing. In, anybody who's watching the picture here can see the gray hair. I've been in a few organizations in my time, and in any one, they have a couple of systems that are considered mission critical. And there's a lot of other systems that if they go down, there's a department who's a little frustrated or something like that, but they're not considered mission critical to the overall organization. In a smart city, practically every system is mission critical for somebody, some of their constituents. It's only affecting one neighborhood out of 14, major zones that we have. Doesn't matter. That one, it's mission critical for them. And so any outage is a significant problem, acutely painful, political repercussions. So there's that scale too, that, if you love working on stress, work for a municipality, smart city, and try to keep that secure. But you mentioned vulnerabilities. I want to let's pivot on to the gaps, because there's so much going on, and I've seen some competitions. Actually, Europe's been doing a lot of big pushes. Copenhagen, Antwerp, Amsterdam. I've been looking at some of their programs. They actually have like financial incentives to get people, just anybody in the country, if you've got an app that you think of that can help, and they're not even saying it has to have to be an app that does this, they're leaving it wide open. Submit your ideas for new apps and we'll help you fund it and build it.
Yep.
But what I'm seeing is they're not building security into these apps any more than, face it, any of our listeners who've been in security any length of time knows that the big problem is a lot of the applications we deal with don't really have a whole lot of security built in. That's still a major gap we're dealing with here. And when you start opening the door to inventors and first-time startups to be your primary source for applications on something like a smart city network, that's going to be a big gap. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, because as I've read some reports from Barclays and other major financial investment firms, they've been talking about where they want their people to invest. And they're actually telling people, don't invest in the applications. What you want to do, the safe bet and where the need is most, is infrastructure. So is that something that you're seeing in what you've been working with?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is the public-private partnership, right? And like you said, I think a lot of European countries have recognized that a public-private partnership is key. So that's why they're having these kind of tech innovative challenges, especially I think in the Nordic, Baltic urban areas. It took place earlier this year. Like you said, they are inviting startups to propose ideas for things like a healthier city lifestyle, sustainable urban infrastructure, right? Reimagining like just transport and mobility in these cities, right? And so I think that that's the right approach. Like partnership between public and private sector, I think, is super critical. And you can leverage the expertise and the innovation that comes from startups, right? And you can leverage the experience from city administrators and city officials on how to effectively run these larger cities. So it's kind of a win-win for both. But again, there are challenges, right? How do you troubleshoot any issues with the infrastructure? How do you detect hacks and attacks and stop them? So those are some of the challenges. And when you look at the infrastructure alone, back to your question about infrastructure security, right? It could become the weak link if not done right. And I think interconnectivity is super critical, but also there should be some level of foundational security that can be leveraged in a smart city environment. So what I mean by that is, like we talked about earlier, you can't these devices, the endpoint devices or whatever, the smart sensors, they are not built for security. They are built for scale. They are built for the particular function that they were designed to do, right? Security is generally an afterthought. It's non-existent. So where else in the infrastructure can you bolster security? And one of the ways, one of the areas in the infrastructure that supports these IoT devices or the smart sensors is DNS, right? Because either these are IP enabled devices or they connect to a gateway that is IP enabled. And so, when it's IP enabled, it does DNS requests. It uses DNS to connect, to go to a server, to send data back and forth, to get additional instructions, things like that. So one way to bolster security in a smart city type IoT deployment is to leverage DNS for foundational security. So if we saw, I think maybe 2016, I believe, that connected cameras were launching DDoS attacks because they were hacked. The password was easily hacked, and it formed a botnet and it started launching DDoS attacks back in the day, like a few years ago. So when you leverage DNS security, things like use threat intelligence to make sure these devices are not connecting to a known bad destination and are not forming a botnet, you can actually stop things like botnet formation or having data exfiltrated to an external destination from these devices, right? So, general malware related, negative impact can be minimized when you use DNS-based security. So I think that
Yeah.
is kind of like a baseline that you can that smart cities can do to make sure there is some amount of security in these IoT environments.
Well, I was thinking, just I remember early on when I think I took when I was in high school, they were doing positive mental attitude and all that. And one of them was talking about stoplights shouldn't be called stoplights. They should be called go lights,
Yeah.
because if they all stop working, if they all go out of commission, traffic stops. It doesn't go. Traffic lights make things go.
Mhm.
And so, there's that kind of thing. They can do just the hacktivism type of stuff where they can infiltrate these devices. But your botnet example of where they can be used to attack other things, let's keep in mind the scale issue you brought up earlier. City of Los Angeles has about 5,000 traffic lights. So just traffic lights. They also have parking meters in, again, tens of thousands. There's so many of these devices that attackers only have to hack that one system. And you mentioned again, they all run on a common infrastructure. If they can compromise the infrastructure, that gives them access to everything. They can then compromise all those devices, either again to directly cause damage or steal data, or they can just use them for another attack. Because for something like the denial of service attacks, one of the big problems they have is compromising systems. And so they can hire some, guy who's great at crafting phishing emails so that they can send it out and try to gee, can we get 25,000 consumer PCs? And then when we launch our attack, let's hope that all 25,7 are actually on at that moment. Well, maybe half of them, it's nighttime, they've turned their computers off because we got them around the world. So if they're lucky, they get 10,000 to actually work at the time they need them. It's a lot of work. But if they can compromise one system, and that's one of the things I've noticed here, is that the smart cities, they have so many resources for the bad guys that they may not be the direct victim, but they can be the launch pad of a major attack that could then have big impact. And you mentioned the DNS side, but there's also the side I wanted to highlight here. I'm shifting gears here for people who haven't picked this up here, because if you're watching the view, you kind of see my head nod, but audio, no. So the other part of this infrastructure, though, is if they're all remote, one of the biggest problems I hear from people on any network, in a business or corporate network, one of the biggest problems they complain about is they don't know what's on their network. They never know. And in this kind of a network, who's going to know that all of a sudden 10 new devices just showed up on the traffic light network? 10 new devices, they kind of fit the profile, but they actually aren't supposed to be there. Who would know that? How would you recognize it out of 45,000? This is where things like DHCP management, IPAM, and even you mentioned DNS, those are services that a lot of us take for granted. We just ship it off and, no, there's a cloud service, I'll just use that. But taking those things in-house, that's what they, in my mind, that's what they really need to be doing. They need to take those services in-house, their core services. If they can control those, if they manage those, that helps, number one, reduce the opportunities for the attackers, but it also ensures that visibility and control capability you mentioned about. Would you agree with that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think DNS, DHCP, and IP address management are tightly linked services that work together to make sure that anything that's connecting to the network is able to connect. Number one, it's resilient to attacks, and also you get that visibility with the IP address management. So anything that needs to connect, anything that needs an IP address, your IP address management solution is going to know about it. It's going to be in the database, right? So you overcome that challenge of not knowing what's on your network. If you just look at a enterprise grade IP address management solution, you'll know what's on your network, right?
Yeah, and I want to make a call out because we actually have a good section of our listener base are people who are in their first few years of security, or in universities about to graduate in this area, and they're pursuing it. That if you have that IP visibility and so forth, those are the platforms that then can connect and make things like zero trust more possible. Like the DNS calls can actually be linked and connected to things like automation systems, vulnerability testing systems. These foundational systems can then be leveraged for so many other things that you hear about that, oh, well, if you're going to do security, you need to have this capability. Yeah, but what's going to trigger that capability? Like a smart city where, yeah, these things are all great. Every one of them, we've got the best traffic light system. We've got the best water, management system. But it's when they connect together that they start getting some scale. And that's the same thing with all these security solutions. So I think that's why, the Barclays and other investment firms of the universe are basically saying, make sure the smart cities are building a good foundation at this level, at the infrastructure level, and then you build those other things on top of it, and you get actually more out of those investments later on.
That's exactly right. And I think you bring up a good point on zero trust. So zero trust is all about the identity of the device and the identity of the user, right? And so the IP address, the IP metadata, or IPAM metadata as we call it, or the DHCP fingerprint information will give you all the information you need about the identity of the device, right? Is it a machine running Windows? Is it a Mac? Is it some sort of smart meter? Because the more profiling you can do, the more you get information about the identity of the device. And of course, you can get information about the user if it is a laptop, if there is some integration with AD type solutions. But and then they can, organizations or smart cities can implement policies based on the identity, right? I'm going to allow
Mhm.
this part of the network, these type of devices to have this type of access, right? And it becomes easier to do that zero trust policy enforcement.
Yeah, I do want to do a quick call out because we kind of went into IPAM and the identity access information, knowing what's on your network. We actually did a 2-part podcast here about a month or so ago for anybody who wants to really drill into that, entitled "Who's Do you know who's on your network?" Who or what is on your network, actually, and that's in the smart city sense, because most of these devices, you said the device and the user, and in most cases, it's just the device. There is no user identity to set up is this a trusted user? It's all about, is this a trusted device?
That's right.
And that's the management nightmare that these guys face.
That's right. Absolutely right.
I just want to wrap up. We actually have had a lot of good discussion here. We've got just a few minutes left. Ransomware, it's almost like, okay, I think there's a law. I'm not allowed to have a podcast unless we talk about ransomware. So we're going to bring this up, but also because ransomware has been seen, in a lot of corporate environments, but not so much at the municipal level. How much are we seeing this is it just like corrupting all the records so that they can't see what traffic light activity has been, or is it causing shutdowns? What's the impact of ransomware in a smart city?
So you'll be surprised that there has been a lot of ransomware attacks on cities in the last like 2.5 years, right? And it's not like for any fault of the city, but it's just attackers have gotten more creative, right? And so back in December 2019, one of the cities in Florida was infected by Maze ransomware. For those of you who remember the Maze ransomware pop up its ugly head like a year and a half ago. And the Maze ransomware is different in that it not only just holds the data for hostage, but if it could also leak that data to bad actors or sell it in the black market, right? So and if you don't pay the ransom. So this particular city was held hostage for, I think, $1 million, if I remember. And when the ransomware attack happened, like I said, smart cities is not just about these sensors. It's about their digital systems and communication systems, right? That they're used for processing online payments from or providing services to the community. So all of those systems were down during this ransomware attack, and so what happened was the city's IT department had to take down many of their systems as a precaution. They didn't want the impact to be worse. So they had to proactively take down a lot of their systems, which means the community was not getting the services that they need. Online payment systems for energy and utilities were affected. So was the city's sanitation department services. So it's larger than just maybe a traffic light not working or a parking meter not working. This is like your whole ecosystem is kind of down from a city perspective. And there are many other cities. Georgia had a ransomware. The state of Georgia had some other cities get attacked with Samsung ransomware. And all of the recovery costs are definitely in the millions, right? I've seen numbers like 17 million recovery cost for one particular city, 2 million to remediate, right? Things like that. So it's expensive for these smart cities, and these are unexpected costs. And as you all know, cities have tight budgets, and when you have such unexpected costs, it can really impact their capability to respond, and also impact citizen services. So the ransomware is definitely not sparing any of these smart cities. It's targeting them just as it's targeting, let's say, a financial institution or a retail. So
All right.
yeah.
Well, unfortunately, as usual, we've run out of time before we've run out of things to talk about. So Krupa, really, thank you very much for joining us today.
Happy
And
to have the conversation. Yeah.
I'm glad we were able to get you to fit us in, because I know you've been really crazy busy the last few weeks. But I also want to thank our viewers and listeners for their time, and join us next time as we continue our efforts to help you stay on top of cybersecurity and ahead of cyber risks with Tech Talk.